Hi, welcome to AWS Summit Online. This session is Well-Architected 201, WAR 201, where we're asking the question, are you well-architected? My name's Rodney Lester. I'm a senior SA manager here at AWS, in charge of the Well-Architected Framework. We created Well-Architected to address this specific question. Most of you can look at your systems and we want to answer the question, are you well-architected? Hopefully most of you are saying yes. After all, you've hired excellent people, bought excellent technology. You're doing your best to do what's right for your customers. But I'd like to talk a little bit deeper about what AWS Well-Architected actually is. It consists of 5 foundational pillars of architecture. One of the things that we really want you to do is be able to apply a consistent process to every system that you look at. And last, we really want to give you the capability of being able to look at all your applications and workloads across your technology portfolio in order to see greater trends. Your confidence gets increased when you apply a consistent process. You'll know that you're actually addressing things that you need to address. But often the review processes are conducted by different people in different parts of the organization, and those different people ask different questions. It may be that they've got a particular bent that they're experts in, and so therefore it's more important to them than other places are. But nonetheless, it's actually quite rare to have someone who can actually consistently review your entire technology portfolio. So Well-Architected was basically built in order to allow you to do this. So I'll give you some time to read this customer quote. So this customer actually went through their entire portfolio and performed assessments. It gave them an understanding of where they fundamentally needed to educate their people, as well as give them a way of actually making informed risks before they deployed their workloads. So I'll give you a few more seconds. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the history of Well-Architected. So I want you to know that it's been battle tested. Well-Architected has been around for 8 years now, and I was part of the original crew that actually created Well-Architected. We sat in a room and we basically hashed out why were some customers successful and other customers not. We came up with a list of basically generic best practices that could be applied regardless of what the workload actually was. So we continually do that process, as a matter of fact. It is constantly updated, often multiple times a year, where we will actually review, take a look. There's more to Well-Architected than just simply the best practice. The phrasing of the best practice actually makes a difference as well in order to make it more applicable to more customers. So if you look at the history here, I'll walk you through it. Well-Architected was started in 2012. In 2013, we asked solutions architects to start conducting reviews of customer workloads. One of the things we discovered out of having them conduct those reviews was that there was often a miscommunication between what the purposes of the best practices were versus how they were implemented. So we took that and we separated them into 4 pillars. In 2015, we actually published this framework out to the public as a white paper, the Well-Architected Framework. It was the first public version that was seen. One of the things we quickly discovered after getting customer feedback from that was that we had actually missed another foundational pillar. That was operational excellence. So in 2016, we actually added the operational excellence pillar as part of one of those changes that I talked about. In 2017, we actually started educating our partners in how to apply Well-Architected to the systems that they were building. And we built a concept known as a lens, which is a specialized technology or industry view onto Well-Architected that supplies additional questions and additional best practices that need to be taken into consideration. That initial set of lenses was serverless, high-performance computing, and the Internet of Things. We've now added 3 additional ones this year, which are machine learning, analytics, and our first industry lens, which is the financial services industry. In 2018, we introduced a public self-service tool in the AWS console known as the Well-Architected tool. One of the key new concepts and new content that we actually created at that point was improvement plans. So if you select that you've implemented certain best practices, but not all of them, you'll get a list of a high-level way that you can either use AWS services or partner or third-party systems to implement best practices. We'll also give you additional resources that you can go learn about what these best practices are on top of what we've already got within our white papers and within the tool itself. Here in 2020, we actually put the well-architected serverless lens into the tool as well. And as I mentioned, we've authored 3 additional lenses this year, and you can look forward to seeing those in the tool in the future. So why should you apply the AWS Well-Architected Framework? So it's pretty simple, really. If you consistently apply the same principles and best practices to everything that you build and deploy onto the cloud, you'll discover that you are now building and deploying things faster. The other thing about being consistent and being knowledgeable about what the risks are is that you can actually lower and mitigate those risks. You can choose which risks under which conditions you wish to apply them. There are certain applications and workloads that you have that you'll want to take very low risks with, and others, which are often internal applications, which can tolerate a higher risk profile. So you want to look and evaluate exactly what your risks are in your workloads. This allows you to make those informed decisions. You can actually trade off the risk versus what the actual business benefits are. The last thing that Well-Architected is really intended to do, and it's not last in chronological area, it's the first, is to teach you best practices to begin with. You can learn them by reading the Well-Architected Framework. We'd actually encourage anyone who is looking to deploy anything to the cloud to read the Well-Architected Framework to start with, to give them a basis of information from which they can build their workloads. And frequently read it again. It's fairly comprehensive across the 5 pillars, and it's not going to be something that you're going to memorize at any one moment. As a matter of fact, I've been working on it for 8 years, and I can't tell you everything off the top of my head. I often have to read through them in order to give explicits when I talk to people. So the other thing that Well-Architected Framework gives you, and the Well-Architected tool, is it actually gives you a mechanism for your cloud journey. Here at Amazon, we talk about how mechanisms give results that good intentions don't. Everyone always has the intention to build the best architecture they possibly could. Now you're actually able to measure whether or not you've actually implemented those best practices. So the most important thing about discovering whether or not you've implemented a best practice or have a risk is to actually improve your architectures. That's something that I really want to emphasize. We're currently emphasizing this to all our customers, which is don't live with the risks that you have lived with for years. We see it consistently bite customers, and most of the time they actually knew about it in advance. We want to give you a mechanism for which you can actually give a business reason of why you should invest in those improvements. And once again, we're constantly updating the framework, so we want you to learn what they are. Another thing that I think is very important about using the Well-Architected tool is you shouldn't think of it as something you just do once. It is what we've discovered over the course of implementing our services and rapidly changing them over the course of the years is that small incremental changes, which is a best practice, add up to large changes eventually. So we have a standard that you review internally at least annually. And if working on a service that is rapidly evolving, more often than that. Many companies have standards where they conduct these kinds of reviews if they make a very large change. But small changes, once again, add up to large change over time. The most important part about conducting a well-architected review is not to actually know that you have risk, it's to give you a reason to improve it, improve your architecture. So what does the well-architected framework consist of? I mentioned the pillars earlier, But they also have design principles. So design principles are idiomatic ways of thinking about cloud design. And then, of course, there's the questions themselves that get asked. We're going to dig a little deeper into those. So why are they called pillars? So pillars are, building a virtual architecture is very similar to building a building architecture. You have certain things that you need to get right to begin with in order to build what you want on top of it. And if you neglect one of the fundamental pillars, it's possible that that could erode the confidence you have in your end product. So we ended up calling it pillars of well-architected. Design principles are idiomatic ways to think about cloud design. So when you read the best practices themselves, people often get hung up on specific words or questioning whether things are applicable. The purpose of the design principles is to get you thinking in the reasons of why the actual best practices exist. So you'll notice in the Well-Architected Framework, we've got design principles overall for the cloud. So what do you need to think about when you're designing for the cloud? And then for the respective pillars, we actually have additional design principles, which will help you drive your thinking as to why you would want to implement a best practice. So here I've got an example of one for security, which is automate responses to security events. If you look through all the security best practices, you'll discover that a lot of the best practices actually are implementing this principle. So take a look at the principles. If you're confused about a best practice, go back to the design principles. It may be a design principle for the pillar, or it may be an overall cloud design principle, but that can help you think about why it's a best practice. The questions themselves are fairly straightforward. They consist of 4 basic areas. The first is the pillar area. Each pillar has a number of areas that it covers, and that ranges typically from 3 to 5 to 7, that are just a general grouping of what the pillars talk about. It's just a subject area. In this case, this is the reliability pillar, and this is a question about failure management. Then you have the question itself. The question has a 3-letter code or 2-letter code, depending on which pillar it is in. And then it's got a number. The numbers are not intended to be an order of importance or order of priority. They're simply a number that you can use to associate a particular best practice with a question. So in this case, it's reliability 7. Underneath that, we have context. So why is this question being asked? So once again, this is to put it into the business context. Why is this important to your business? You really should be thinking about well-architected and all your workloads about how they improve your business, because they do in some manner or another, or you wouldn't be building them and operating them. And then last is the list of best practices. So the list of best practices are a statement and then an explanation of why that best practice is important. So next thing we're going to talk about is how you apply well-architected to your systems. One of the key things here is the intent of the review. Right, so we've tried very hard to communicate to all our customers that this is not an audit. You're not failing something if you conduct a well-architected review and discover that you have risks. We're actually just trying to work together with you to improve your architectures and more importantly, improve your future architectures. So as you build things, you'll actually build them well to begin with. A second real thing to think about is that we've carefully worded these best practices so that it's pragmatic, proven advice, that you can understand what we're asking you to do. It's not going to require, as we have in here, an architecture astronaut. You're not going to have to study deeply in order to understand what the best practice states. It should be fairly straightforward for you to understand. But keep in mind, there are multiple ways of implementing these best practices. You can use AWS services. You can use third-party services. We often have partners and companies that have their own internal best practice solutions for implementing these best practices. So there's multiple ways of doing it. And lastly, I really want to re-emphasize that this is not a one-time check. It's really important that if you perform a review and then you improve, you go back and look at it again and mark it as improved. You may actually have learned something over the course of time where you've discovered that, hey, you actually improved another thing that you hadn't even considered while you were doing this. Or it may be that you now know more about what a best practice actually is, and something that you thought you were meeting, you actually are not meeting any longer. So you do want to constantly review it. I'll reiterate, internally, we do it at least yearly, and you should too, possibly more if you've got a really rapidly advancing architecture. So there are basically three ways that you can conduct a review. The simplest is self-service. It's the reason why we built it. At any point, you can get your technical leaders and business leaders together, go into the AWS console, and start conducting a review. Now, you may find after you've done that the first time that you actually need to do some preparation, have some documentation, and have some good reasons. So there's likely to be some preparation, but you'll get good at it with the course of time. We have several customers that do this. We call them well-architected champions. Another option that you have is to engage a partner. Like I said, in 2017, we started educating partners on how to do this. And when we launched the Well-Architected tool in 2018, we actually launched the Well-Architected partner competency as well. So you can actually go into the AWS partner portal and search for well-architected competency partners and find them. We have them all around the world, and we're growing rapidly. This is a very popular program, and we're finding it very popular with our customers. It's a scaling effort for us. And you'll see why when I get into the third way, which is you can actually have an AWS Solutions Architect sit down and do this with you. Many companies have a single solutions architect, or you're sharing a solutions architect with other companies, in which case they don't have the time to conduct perhaps the tens of reviews that you would like to have done over the course of a year. But there are places where you definitely want to have the AWS sit with you. And I'll get into that in the next slide. So once again, here are some of the major reasons why you would choose one way to review the workloads versus another. Self-service, you have full control of how often and when you do it. You can also set internal standards for things. It becomes very simple and part of your regular processes. A partner, we've found many times the reason why customers don't actually address these issues is because they don't have certain skilled resources, or actually sometimes it's just a sheer resource shortage. So partners excel at doing staff augmentation and being able to help you where you don't have that capability yourself. So it's a very valuable option for people who need to get things improved quickly to engage with a partner. Last, AWS Solutions Architects, you may want to engage with them for particularly critical workloads. So the main business drivers, or if you have a particularly thorny issue that you can't figure out how to implement the best practice and you want some advice on how to do that. All our AWS Solutions Architects are trained in Well-Architected as part of their onboarding and continually trained in repeat training. So you should reach out to them when you have a particularly thorny issue. There are some other particular benefits for using partners, however. We have the Well-Architected Partner Competency has a program to incent you to use partners. If you engage a well-architected partner for a review, there's many partners that actually will conduct this review for free. And they will present you with the results and a statement of work for how to improve some of the risks that were found. If you engage with that partner within 30 days of receiving that statement of work and implement an improvement, you'll actually qualify for an AWS credit. We would highly encourage you to take advantage of this program. So here's another quote from a customer that actually successfully used a partner to drive their well-architected journey. This one's a little bit longer quote, so I'm going to give you a little bit more time. But they saw the same benefits. They were able to make informed trade-offs and get a more consistent application of best practices across their workloads. So what are some of the things we've learned over the course of the years of having well-architected? So the first thing is conducting it pre-launch only is probably not the best solution. We've had many customers who have not looked at to see if their workloads are well-architected until right before they go live. And the fact of the matter is that schedules are non-functional requirements that can often be very much business-driven. In which case, you may not have the time to actually make the improvements that you want. And if the risk that you have identified is exposed, it could immediately be that you are taking down the thing that you just launched. So we would like you to look at this much further into the future. As I said, as soon as you've got a plan, is a great time to do it. When you've got most of the functionality, or in the case of a migration, when you've got a lot of the migration, take a look at it. And certainly before you actually go live, it's worth looking at again, just to ensure that you haven't compromised on something that you regard as critical. Another thing that we've learned is that people aren't making conscious decisions to implement poor architectures. That is not what is happening. Usually it's because they were literally unaware of what the best practice was. Often they bring previous experience. So things that worked well in on-premises data centers have different solutions in the cloud. You can achieve the same business goals, but sometimes you have to think about it differently. So it's not that they've consciously made a decision to make something poor, it's that they didn't know that they needed to consider a different way of doing it. So this talks to the education portion of AWS Well-Architected. We would really like you and encourage you to read the Well-Architected Framework and learn what it has to say and how it applies so that you can apply it to your own workloads. One of the last things that we've learned is that most workloads can be improved. Now, this may be shocking to most people who think that they've operated something for a long time with no problems. But it really shouldn't. Finding them shouldn't be a shock. It shouldn't necessarily be a stop the presses, hold everything moment either. Because after all, it was been there for as long as your workload's been there. However, it will allow you to take that business concern and apply that priority to your backlog in order to make sure that you do improve your workload. So I'd like to talk about the use cases. What are the use cases for applying well-architected? As I've said, really, learning best practices is one of the key use cases for AWS Well-Architected. You don't know what you don't know. Most of us who are experienced technologists have experienced where we started out, we learned a lot, we thought we were the experts shortly into our career, typically 5 to 6 years, and then you start discovering the things that you don't know. And if you're like me, I've been in this industry for decades, I would probably evaluate the amount of knowledge that I don't have as significantly larger than the knowledge that I do have. So you can always learn, and everyone should be actively learning in this industry. So it's one of the key use cases. The second is really for technology governance. We actually fall within the management and governance toolset of AWS, but we want to ensure that you don't think of us as only governance. We'd like you to incorporate Well-Architected into part of your regular reviews of all your workloads, but that shouldn't be the only way you apply Well-Architected. You'll often find yourself having similar battles to probably what you do now when you do conduct governance reviews, where people are questioning the value of it. If you take the education part of that and apply it first, you'll find that you'll have far less of those arguments at this point. And last, you can actually use the Well-Architected tool to perform portfolio management. It gives you a place where you can actually see what all your workloads actually have. You can see where are you commonly having risks, where you may want to invest in training in order to improve that risk profile. Another place you may discover is that you were perfectly fine in a particular area, but over the last few years, it's started to creep in often. In which case, what are you doing that perhaps is causing that to happen? So this will give you a way that you can actually look at your entire portfolio and your entire company and figure out where you're going with it. Oh, one last place that I'd actually like to encourage all of you to use Well-Architected is actually a process internally known as a correction of error, but you may know it as a root cause analysis. So if you have a problem on AWS and you contact us, probably one of the first questions we're going to ask is, did you conduct a well-architected review on this? You could do that yourself, and you should think of doing that yourself. You may identify that you actually missed a best practice that you thought you had applied, or that you, once again, I talk about how small incremental changes add up to large changes over the course of time, that at one point you were perfectly fine, but you introduced these changes and introduced this risk. So I really would like to encourage you to use it yourself to do a root cause analysis. So last, I'd like to call you to action to get started. We have a website. It's aws.amazon.com/well-architected, where you can find links to all our content, including the white papers, Kindle versions of those white papers, links to the console tool, links to our online documentation. There's plenty of resources there. You could go and read them all, read off to the source materials that we link you to. It would take you hours to get through all of it. You should probably start reading it now. You should talk to your account team, talk to a partner, find out how they can help you, especially if you're struggling. If you're repeatedly having problems, you probably do want to talk to us or a partner to see how you can improve your workloads and the way that you're actually doing things. And lastly, as most of us as engineers know, there's no better way to learn anything than to actually perform the action. So start the tool. Go to it, start reviewing the workloads you're currently working on, that you're currently implementing. See if you identify anything new that you didn't consider. All of us are in this constant learning mode. I'm constantly learning how our customers are doing things. When we release new services and features, we discover that that people aren't using them in the manner that we thought they were, and instead they've got a much better way of implementing things. That gets reflected in Well-Architected. So please go out, review your workloads. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for the time that you spent with me. You can contact me at this email address, and happy architecting.